Hello! Today's stories come from r/MaliciousCompliance. We've got 5 stories today. We're going to start with, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Goes both ways. My new manager at work is one of those people that absolutely has to be in control. Even when you're exceeding every scorecard measure, keeping your head down, not putting a toe out of line, she still asks you to come to a meeting room to discuss some minor issue or another. Recently, she pulled me into a meeting to discuss me being late from work. Protocol is to call in, say you'll be late, then submit a schedule adjustment request when arriving. She accused me of not calling in or submitting a request, but was able to prove I did. Only instead of leaving it at that, she insisted I now needed to call her and explain why I was late. That's not the process, I told her, and she said she was making a new one. So now I call her at 6 a.m., on her day off, to let her know I'm going to be late. She also had a meeting with me because my scorecard for a stat was 99 out of 100, with a target of 50. She had to point out the 1 out of 100 I missed. She also did the same for a handling time issue where I am hitting an average of 600 seconds with a target of 1500. She needed to tell me about a call I took too long on. Suffice to say, complaints have been raised to her manager. Following an incident where she was asked to follow up on something for me and claimed if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, I've been asking for everything in writing and repeat that mantra back to her when she claims to have told me something. Last week, she asked me to see her after my call. I walked over and she wasn't there, so went back to my desk. She asked me why I didn't stay around, and I reminded her of the time she put in writing that I wasn't to spend more than 1 minute waiting for her if she asked to see me and was to go back to my desk to take calls, not wasting time. She asked me to come over again, and when I did, she wasn't there. This repeated twice more before my shift was over. Each time I documented, logged out at 14:35 p.m., came to your desk, you were not there, spent 45 seconds waiting, returned to desk, and took another call at 14:38 p.m. in chat. She messages me to ask what time I finish. I tell her it was 2 minutes prior, and she says we can catch up now. I tell her that my shift is over, and ask if she'll approve an overtime pay for an out-of-hours meeting. She tells me not to be silly, and it'll just take 10 minutes. I refuse and say if I don't get paid, we can do it tomorrow when I am being paid. She's typing, then not, then typing, then not, choosing her words. I know she's angry at being challenged, and she decided to employ one of the tactics she used when she managed a team for a company where this was standard practice. Okay, well, if you'd like to go home now, I can always make it a formal meeting. A formal meeting where I work is code for a meeting with HR documented on your record for misconduct and repeated issues. She thinks she's one. Not a problem. Make a formal meeting. Ensure I have 24 hours notice. Send a formal invite, and I will bring a support person with me. I log out and leave, but not before grabbing screenshots and saving a copy of the chat logs. Next day, she's called my bluff and has a meeting scheduled. I sent it to my union rep, and she comes in on the day. HR sits down with us and opens with, "So, we're here today to discuss some concerns. Your team leader asked you to attend an off-the-cuff catch-up 3 times, and for some reason, you refused?" I quickly clarify what actually happened. My manager claims otherwise, and I repeat her mantra. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Then I supply receipts. Her demands to put things in writing, her chat, my timestamps, my call logs, and her message to me afterwards. My union rep stares at the two of them with a small smile and asks, "So, do you maintain the position that employees should attend meetings unpaid and that misconduct investigations are a good use of resources if they refuse?" HR said there may have been a miscommunication and that I could return to work. I have it put in writing that I am not accused of any misconduct and have been cleared of any false accusations, with nothing documented on my staff file. Yesterday, my team was advised that our team leader had decided to pursue opportunities outside of the company, and we were getting a new manager. Don't you love it when a bad boss's mantra, policy, or BS guidelines bite them in the butt? Their documentation was on point, but I think it was probably the presence of the union that led to the outcome, and not everyone is so lucky. This one's a bit older, but short, and it's just the quintessential malicious compliance. I really couldn't pass it up, so I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. My appointment was canceled for being 5 minutes late? I guess I have to reschedule. This happened about 4 years ago when I got a summer job at my university. The job was working for professors that I had worked with before, and they asked me last minute to teach a summer workshop to 9th and 10th graders. So with less than 2 weeks before the camp starts, I have a bunch of paperwork to do first, including clearances that say I can work with kids. One of these is an official FBI check for which they need my fingerprints. Well, I needed to do the physical fingerprinting right away in order to get the result in time. Luckily, I was able to book a fingerprinting appointment for that Friday, booked 24 hours in advance as required, which would be just barely enough time to get the result. That Friday, I catch the subway to campus and it's atrociously slow. I'll admit, I should have planned for this. The subway here is always behind. Anyway, I end up slightly late getting to campus, so I literally run to the police station and enter the front room at exactly 5 minutes after my appointment time. I know this because, as I stepped through the door, I felt my phone buzz with what turned out to be a "Your appointment has been cancelled" email. I speak to the security or cop behind the bulletproof glass inside, and I learn the appointment was cancelled after he checks my confirmation number. Apparently, they are automatically cancelled if you're not checked in within 5 minutes. Obviously, this is outrageous, but I'm usually a patient guy. I ask if I can book a new appointment. That's no good since it would have to be Monday or later. So I grab a coffee from across the street and return to sit inside the police station to try and solve this with some Googling while I slip into a more and more frantic state of frustration. I can't find anywhere in the city that can fingerprint me before Monday. But here's what really pushed me over the edge. While I'm sitting there, at this point 30 minutes past my appointment time, someone else comes in for fingerprints. She shows up 5 minutes early, they take her in immediately, and she's out before her appointment was even scheduled to begin. The entire thing took her about 2 minutes. I point out to the cop behind the glass, as politely as I can, that clearly someone could see me right now because her appointment is already over. Why can't I have the current slot? But the cop insists that since my appointment was cancelled, my registration info was no longer in the system, and I can't be seen today. That's when the idea comes to me and I confirm with him that showing up early is not a problem, because they would have my appointment and registration info in the system. You see where I'm going with this. So I quietly sit back down and take out my phone. About 10 minutes later, I calmly approach him again and say, "Hello, I have a new appointment to be fingerprinted. I'm about 72 hours early." I have never seen such an exasperated sigh in my life. But he checked my new confirmation number and everything was in order. Within 10 minutes, I was walking back out after getting fingerprinted. Ugh, I don't get it. If it was such a non-issue, why was there even a problem with him being 5 minutes late? Because there wasn't, but they're just going with a standard operating procedure. Sometimes bureaucracy can be so infuriating when it just takes a moment to consider the human element and you can resolve things for everyone. Third story is, does your priority take precedence over his priority? I was working as the technical writer for a software company that had contracts across a number of business types, everything from government utilities to military simulation. As such, I ended up tasked by several teams in the company, each one needing my immediate attention in generating users' guides and documentation for their projects. My bosses only had two Bob, also needed me to assist them in writing proposals for various contracts that they were bidding on. This led to me constantly being pulled in multiple directions at once, as everyone needed me to finish their projects yesterday. I was working until late in the night, sometimes to finish vital projects that they just had to have. The final straw came when, after listening to one of the programming teams complain at me for failing to update the user's guide for a software update that they had only finished the day before, and one of my bosses called me into his office to chew me out for failing to complete his proposal that he kept making changes to at 11 p.m. the night it was due to be submitted. Oh, and our office manager had left for maternity leave, so our penny-pinching bosses figured I could do her tasks like answering phones, buying office supplies, and entering time cards in my copious spare time. When he told me sternly that I would need to learn to manage my work time better, I finally snapped. Malicious compliance powers activate. I came in on a Sunday and posted up a huge magnetic whiteboard behind my desk that was visible as you walked into my office. I made colored magnetic labels with each project I was currently doing, who had assigned the task, and the due date of each. I also put a column of numbers, 1 through 20, along the side. I then placed each task in order of due date. I came in early that morning, and as usual, each team lead came into my office to ask the status of their tasking of me. I pointed behind me at my board, and said I am currently working on tasks 1 and 2. If you think your task takes priority, I'm going to need written permission from the people above you to move your task above theirs. There were a lot of unhappy people that morning. Eventually, the bosses sauntered in and came into my office after listening to all the teams complaining to them about me ignoring their projects. They both came in my office, and before they had said anything, I pointed behind me. All I said was, I am currently juggling 18 projects and the job of the full-time office manager. I can only work on so many things simultaneously. If you think that any of my projects are out of priority order, let me know. Otherwise, leave me alone. The two of them stared at the board for about 5 minutes before leaving. About an hour later, they came in and said that they didn't realize the amount of work each of the teams was throwing on my plate because each team thought I had plenty of spare time. I wish I could say that I got a raise or an attaboy, but by then, end of the day, 6 items were pulled from my board and given back to the programming teams. Oh, and my bosses hired a temp to take care of the phones and time cards until our office manager returned. Sorry it wasn't a people got fired or the company folded a year later kind of story, but I thought it belonged here. Edit 1. For those asking, no, I am no longer with that company. It closed its doors several years back when it failed to win enough new contracts to keep the lights on. Also, please don't think my bosses were buttholes. They were just unaware that other teams were throwing items on my plate. One of my bosses was a really decent guy. For example, later that year, when the engine blew on my car and I was having trouble financing a new vehicle, my boss paid my down payment out of his own pocket so the financing worked out. Most of you won't know I am a total stationery fanatic. This extends to Post-its and whiteboards, so you can imagine the excitement I experienced when OP described an itemized, color-coded project board. So fun. Surprise, someone who reads Reddit stories is a geek. And now for story number 4. Won't honor the contract? Fine. Hope you like hot pink duct tape. Many years ago, I was an elected union president at a Fortune 500 company, but I was only in charge of one contracted group. As such, the bargaining power of the main company was much higher than my own, but even they couldn't intervene too much. My group's contract switched from Company A to Company B in 2012, but the contract remained unchanged. Company B inherited all of the contract requirements of Company A and agreed to meet them, but opted to fight me on several minor clauses when it came down to it. Most were solved without much conflict, but the major sticking point was in regard to uniforms. Our contract ensured that we were given an allowance to pay for new uniforms and vouchers for steel-toe boots every year. When it came time for our new vouchers, they refused, citing that they'd given us a slight raise which should offset the cost of boots. I informed them that a cost of living raise didn't void the portion of the contract requiring them to provide vouchers for shoes, to which they responded they just hadn't figured out how to provide vouchers yet. After assurances they would provide the vouchers as soon as they could work it out, I dropped the issue. Unsurprisingly, months later they still hadn't provided vouchers for replacement shoes. It should be noted that this was a very large campus and many of us walked several miles a day in these shoes, and the shoes were caked with chemicals and dirt and started to look pretty vile within a year. We had to wear the same work shoes in office areas and we had started to get complaints. I decided to lean into this. This is where malicious compliance begins. No new shoes? Fine. I'll rig them up to last longer. I went out and bought several rolls of the flashiest and most obnoxious duct tape I could find. I began to repair holes in my shoes with duct tape and extra fabric to the point that my hot pink shoes became easily recognizable. The safety team for the main company was so amused that they gifted me hot pink safety glasses and gloves to match. I also lent out my gaudy duct tape collection to any employee needing to upgrade their shoes. Suddenly, the complaints about our dirty shoes were replaced by complaints about obviously duct tape shoes. Whenever we were asked, we'd tell both union and non-union coworkers that it was a small protest against the refusal to honor the shoe vouchers in the contract. The next year rolls around and still no shoe vouchers, but suddenly our uniform allowance was increased approximately $150 to allow for new steel-toed shoes to be purchased. After speaking to the union members, I agreed to allow that in place of the vouchers. I kept my duct tape collection permanently on display as a threat and would use it anytime safety equipment wasn't being replaced and required repair. What a crafty way of highlighting, literally, that these employers were not making good on their contract. If it was easy enough to up the uniform allowance, I don't see why they didn't just do that in the first place. And now for our final story. Take off my earphones while you're speaking to me? Sure, no problem, officer. Happened this morning. Even though I made a complete and full stop at a four-way stop, I get pulled over by a police vehicle, lights flashing, the works. I turn my dash cam around to face me and whomever goes in front of the driver's side window. I roll it down and ask, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Officer looks at me the way one would look at a sticky piece of gum stuck to the bottom of one's shoe. "You didn't make a complete stop," he says. I adjust one of my hearing aids, lost part of my hearing due to being a touring session musician previously, and before I could speak, he firmly orders, "Sir, take off your earphones when I'm talking to you." I take both hearing aids off and look at him. I can read lips a little bit, but we're both masked, so I can't understand what he's saying. I communicate in sign language simultaneously while speaking verbally. "I'm deaf and I didn't understand what you just said. Can you communicate to me in American Sign Language, please?" He points at my hearing aids that look like Apple AirPods, motioning me to put them on. I respond, "Yes, officer. Without those, I can only communicate in American Sign Language. Please instruct me in American Sign Language and I will be compliant in every possible way." He looks at the dash cam that's neatly pointed squarely at us and mumbles, "For F's sake." He then motions for me to go, giving me 2 thumbs up. Needless to say, I rolled up the window and drove away as fast as legally allowed. Couldn't wipe the smile off my face all day. Oh goodness, I kind of feel sorry for the police officer. That would be so embarrassing. But maybe he deserved it if he's just randomly pulling people over for no valid reason. Who really knows? Who does a full 3 seconds after the vehicle stops, though? I've never seen one. Not even the cop cars. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.